Hey team, before we dive into today's episode, I've got a quick favour to ask. The Women's Football Hub merch store is now live, and every purchase helps support our work as a non-profit championing women and girls football from the ground up. There's something for everybody, adults and kids. There's loads of colours and sizes, and your support helps us grow the game one piece of apparel at a time. Just head over to www.womensfootballhub.com to check it out. Thanks for backing the hub, and now let's get into the episode.
Hello and welcome to Women's Football Hub. I'm your host for this episode. I am Carolyn Kent, and with me today is a sports scientist with many years' experience in elite football. He's worked with clubs in the UK and abroad at both senior and academy levels, and he's worked at both the men's and the women's game. He's also currently completing a PhD in organisational health and wellbeing, focusing on mental health in football. And he's here today to talk to me all about physical preparation of a female player. Welcome to Women's Football Hub, Andrew Wiseman.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
So am I, actually, because this is a topic that's very close to my heart, because as somebody that was a player who got very little physical preparation, and that led me to my career in physiotherapy because I ended up injured so much. I might actually learn something that I can hopefully pass back to other people so they don't make the same mistakes as me. We talk about physical preparation in football. It's something that, for me, certainly for young females, I think we need to get a lot better at, and thankfully there is a lot of work going into this area. Physical preparation, though, is a very general term. So what does that actually mean for those who've maybe not heard of it before?
Yeah, if I go back about 20 years, if we looked at physical preparation, it was probably a stopwatch and a heart rate monitor and doing this around the pitch. Obviously, as science is involved, we've now got strength and conditioning, which is a science in its own right. What you'll see now, which is very common practice in clubs now, you may have a sports scientist who look after the data, the sort of analytics and the pitch-based stuff. You'll also see a strength and conditioning coach who may or may not be just gym-based. You'll likely see a rehabilitation coach or return to play coach as well, alongside the physio and sports therapist and everyone that's sports medicine. So it's evolved hugely. And I think a lot of that has come down to us understanding the demands of the game a lot more. A lot of research came out around about the early 90s from Scandinavian countries. And we started to understand game demands a lot more.
Yeah, and I think looking at game demands, I was at the FIFA conference just there in May, and they were talking about the stats for intensity. And the women's one, obviously, because of the professionalisation and the rapid growth of it, the intensity in the women's game gone up. So let's chat about preparing almost that male versus female player. Do you think there's a fundamental difference in how we should approach physical prep for females versus males, or is it more about just understanding the individual athlete?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that comes up a lot. I think fundamentally we've got to remember that the game is still the same game. It's not women's football or men's football. It's men that play football, women that play football. It's still, everything else is the same. The rules, the referees, VAR now, it's all the same. I think over the last 5 years in the women's game, in the WSL, I think we saw about 45% injury in games and 55% in training, quad and adductors being the most common. Now, when I look at it that way and in that perspective, do we have a game problem or do we have a training problem? And that's something that when you talk about the rapid professionalization, so if you increase structure, you're automatically going to increase load. If you go from, you don't need to be a mathematician. If you go from training twice a week to 4 times a week, you've doubled that. So we've now got players that are playing 2 games a week. That didn't happen. That happened when I was at Arsenal in the under-21s. We've gone from 1 game to 2 games, multiple days. That happens the next season. It's well documented the players haven't had sufficient rest and recovery time, especially you look at the Lionesses or any international player these days. What is interesting is that there's been no significant change in the WSL, in ACL, or no season increases in hamstring across 5 years up until, I think, 2018 to 2023. But what we do have is biological differences between males and females. And I think that while there's no evidence, or the evidence would be weak to, and if we talk specifically on a menstrual cycle, to base training on that, there's no evidence to saying if you train in this phase, your strength will increase or decrease. But what we do need to understand is the actual athlete themselves. And that's not saying we don't understand male athletes, because we do, but we also need to understand the female. And actually, when we look at some of my research that I've done or been looking into, is the stresses between males and females, and they're different. Males, some of the literature says that males will find time away from home stressful, travel, which surprises me, but females often find their coach relationship, their teammates relationship. So I think if we look at working with both males and females, yes, there's differences. You've got to understand there are different skill sets. I think even to communication as well. There are now quite a few practitioners who've worked across both, but the female athlete seems to be very inquisitive. The male athlete will get on with it, and then they'll have a go at you afterwards. So I think what we've seen, and I hope this answers your question, what we've seen is this rapid professionalisation of the women's game, which is fantastic. It's brilliant. It's even being talked about now. But with that comes, and I don't want to use the term consequences, but with that, there's areas that maybe need to be looked in at greater depth before we start to even go to the top of the mountain, look at 1%ers. We maybe need to look at that groundwork first, which for me starts the training.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because I've always said, look, are we getting the 99% right in women's football before we start focusing on the 1%? And I don't think we're getting at most of the levels the 99% right just yet. And that probably feeds into what you said about training. Why are we getting more injuries in training for women than we are with regards to men? Is it because men have been professional for longer? Is it potentially, and this is something that I think Project ACL is going to look at, what's the experience level of the practitioners that are working with those players? How much experience have they had of loading players? So there's all those things to take into account. So yeah, it's interesting. Let's talk about a typical week, though, with regards to in-season training. What would that look like for a female footballer? You can choose the level from a physical performance perspective.
Yes, so if we look at the elite level, but I guess any level, if you're training 3 or 4 times a week, I think what we need to do, so we will look to try and, if you think of strength, power, speed, change of direction, cells, D cells, try and tick boxes across the training week. But I think we have a technical and tactical objective first, and then we build our physical around that. So I always say it needs to be the right stimulus in the right dose at the right time. So across a week, a typical week, and I'm just going to go a very typical British model. So you might have the players come in, they played on a Saturday, they don't normally come in on a Sunday. They'll do their recovery away from home, which I'm all for, spend time with your families. Then on a Monday, it would be you'll be looking at a playing and non-playing squad, and you'll work with the non-playing squad. They might do small-sided games. They've got to get a change of direction stimulus. They'll need maybe an aerobic stimulus. The other players, and I'm a believer that you can do something, so they may do a pitch-based recovery. I've seen coaches use that on a Monday, working on set pieces, which is not stressing those who play. Then a Tuesday would be very much loading the players. So if you think you recover, load, taper, it's pretty much as simple as that. So over the years, I've seen it lots of different ways. So that might be an 11v11 on that day. There's so many different ways, and there's a lot of different training paradigms that people use. One of the best ways I've found, and this is purely anecdotal from my experience, is working on a very high intensity day, which might be 1v1 to 4v4, and then working on the player's conditioning, slightly isolated, but they're getting that. I'll use maximal aerobic speed, the lowest speed at which you hit your VO2 max. I'll use that as a tool or as an example because it's commonly used. So the players have had a very high intensity day. I think volume, if we look at metrics, quite noisy at times. So they'll have the day off on a Wednesday, and also on that day, they're also getting the active cells and D cells as well. So they're getting a good hamstring stimulus, but also their active cells and D cells. Then they might work on a match day -2. That tends to be a lot bigger spaces, very tactical. And this has been for much debate amongst my fellow practitioners, but that's the day that I would expose them to their maximal, or trying to get above that maximal speed. Now, some people say, they won't be recovered, but come on, you're only doing 2 to 3 sprints or whatever it is. I don't think that's a problem, because I'm going to go into something tactical anyway. And we know that sprint exposure is crucial. So we know for a lot of reasons, but also for hamstring health. That has been my preference, but a lot of people don't do that. They'll try and use the match day -2, and there's nothing wrong with that. And then a match day -1, very standard, very tactical, preparing for a game before game day. So in season, you're looking for just to make little tweaks to try and get some form of overload. But if you can maintain across the season, and many years ago, someone said to me, if you get 5 to 10% drop off across the season, you've done well.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you face when preparing female players physically, especially in that sort of elite semi-professional environment?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenges now is, and I can only talk from the elite end, is the amount of internationals you'll have. Because the talent pool compared to the men's game, if you're going to make a comparison, is a lot smaller. There's something like 70,000 European male professional footballers. There's only 3.5 to 5 female. So that means they are going to play a lot more internationals because they're going to be required by their international federations. Those international breaks go on longer now. So it's quite common to only have a couple of your squad still back at your club. So we've got challenges there. When I worked in the US, we had players flying all over the world for internationals. You've then got, so for an example, in Salt Lake, you have altitude. And some people were complaining of altitude sickness. It affects different people, but then they may need another couple of days from when they come back from international duty, because they may have been away for 10 days. You've got heat. We didn't have humidity there, but if you take the US, it's so diverse. So people are going in and out of different environments. And they're challenges because at some point, and it has happened, I've had a player come back no sleep from an international. They were looking at their metric, incredibly high, and we probably recommend that player's going to need a couple of days, but they're like, no, I'm fine to train. And that was a discussion between the manager and the player. I was involved, but it's, look, this is my side, and they wanted to train. I don't think we're too quick to put limits on people. And I had this discussion with someone the other day that we might say that someone's maximum is 10 kilometers a game, but is it really? Is that really what they're capable of? You don't know what you don't know. Do we put too many limits on people? Why are we afraid to push people? Because fundamentally, that's what sports science was. It still is. You work with athletes to maximize their physical capabilities. So we should be doing that, and we should push our players. Players on moan, but
that's it. And do you know what you just said? That as a former player, I understand that as well. If somebody came across to me and said, "Hey, Carolyn, you've hit your maximum, you need to come off," but I was actually enjoying the session, I'm not going to be a particularly happy bunny. And I have had those conversations. I remember one of the high-profile ACLs that happened May-ish. Mary Fowler flew back from Australia into Manchester City, tore her ACL. Everyone was blaming the travel. Everyone was blaming tiredness. And I'm like, and I don't comment on those things, especially publicly, because those obviously need to stay within the club. And I think it's interesting that the mainstream social media influencer type are starting to pick up on these things. And I definitely think that there is areas up for discussion with regards to the fact that as you say, you've got some players that are flying all around the world, different time zones, no sleep. But there are other players in that club who are barely playing. When you look at the amount of games they're playing per season, they've got some here and some very high. So yeah, it is very, very interesting. But there's other kind of external factors with regards to female players, isn't there? Part-time contracts, dual careers, less access to resources. Did that impact on your ability to deliver during your time?
Yeah, we got around it. We found ways. You've got to find ways. I've worked with players who will do this. I'm going to use the term power on a match day -1. It's the only day they can get it done. But they did it. They're okay. That's the reality of what you have. You have to be able to accommodate a player and their needs. And I think, look back at the pandemic in the NWSL, it was incredible times for the practitioner because you literally had to think. We're going from individual tools. How am I going to keep the delivering equipment to players apart? But suddenly you've got to think. And I remember discussing with the general manager, would they be fit when they come back? I was like, they should. They're just on running 6 weeks. And I think we saw players in all leagues coming back unbelievably fit. And I will use fitness as a broad term because, of course, it's fit to play as well. But when you did testing, we're like, wow, these players are off the scale. But then the reality is you've got to translate that into the game.
100%. I don't think there would be many players who would advocate for any of the pandemic stuff coming back. I don't think they enjoyed that very much. I spoke to Jo Clubb. I had her on a little while back, and she was talking about GPS. It seems to be that sports science is sometimes trivialized down to just tech. How do you, and I don't want to go into, hey, how do you use your tech? But Do you use wellness monitoring? Because that was a big thing of hers is, look, everybody can do wellness monitoring. Do you use that? Do you prefer the tech? What's your sort of take on it?
It's a great question. It's something I thought about a lot over the years. Yes, I use wellness. I think so. I'll start with that one before I moved on to the objective as GPS. But the things like wellness, they're often thought of as capturing well-being. That's a different concept. Well-being is a completely different concept. So then I look at it and think, what's the validity of a 5-point questionnaire, 4 questions about mood, soreness? Can I actually get that from someone from conversation? So I've tried and failed with wellness. If you're shoving that in front of someone's face at 8 o'clock in the morning every morning, you're going to get it. I have seen players that 5 every day. Yeah, everything's great. If you're going to use it, maybe think of twice a week and then take a median score or Z scores, which I know Joe's worked on. Because I think with wellness questionnaires, you should never take anything on face value. You need to understand the norms and the trends of the player. And also, you can look at a group trend, but it's going to be skewed. Yes, they have value, but it depends on what you're using that data for. I've had managers saying, that person's just reported they had 4 hours sleep. I don't think they should train. And I was like, if it's a problem and it's 4 hours sleep for a period of time, we'll let you know. But they're fine. You going to speak to the player? Yeah, no, I'm fine. So it shouldn't be used in that way. And that took a lot of education on the statistics we were doing. So with GPS, an example I'll use for this is, yes, we use it. It gives you, it's an activity profile, really. It's often used as like, I run 12K, therefore I'm the fittest, but actually you don't. If you do break that down in profiles, speed profiles, you'll probably see about 30-40% of that will be walking. Probably going to be about 2% at really high speeds over, let's say 25 kilometers per hour. So you have to be careful now that's being used, but it does give you good information of what someone's doing, and it can be used in training to manipulate variables. As an example, subjective and objective data being used together, I had a manager who said that player didn't perform in training. We looked at players' wellness. We looked at the heart rate, which was about 60%. It wasn't a particularly physical session, but their RPE was 8. It's like, okay, look, I'm going to go and speak to them because I don't want it to evolve into you won't get enough today, you're not going to play. I'll go and speak to them. And what they said is, look, Andy, I've started my cycle. And I thought that's brilliant. That is fantastic information. I'm going to go back to the manager. First, they had the confidence to tell me that. Secondly, is that not why we're using data to try and explain performance? And the manager was fine. I'll keep an eye on it, kind of thing. Not a humble pie there, but that's explaining performance. And I think that's what critical thinking. Technology doesn't do that for you. You still need those skills. And I've seen a trend of just, there's your GPS outputs. That's what happened. But did that happen? How can you explain that? What's the picture are you painting? How have you, and it's frustrating, but at the same time, it comes down to maybe more experienced people to try and say, hey, look, there's better ways of doing this.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because that was one of the next kind of questions that I had, was how do you incorporate female physiology into your planning of sessions? And that's a kind of nice story and experience, that because the coaches noticed something, you've obviously looked and seen some scientific metrics, but actually without confirmation from the player, which is actually what you needed. And I think in clubs, I think that's something that they're getting better at, is people being vocalizing that, do you know what, I'm at this stage of my cycle. And it's a hard one, because I was very lucky as a player. I was somebody that was never really impacted by my menstrual cycle massively, but I know some players who are terrible at certain times of their cycle. So yeah, do you have the same sort of thing with regards to, because say, for example, the answer had been, I haven't eaten very much, or somebody who's maybe reds or low energy availability?
Yeah. So I've been very fortunate to work with incredible nutritionists. So it's always about referring those on. But I think, and so this is a really good discussion about sports science. What is the problem? That's what we're supposed to do with problem solvers. Okay, what can we look at here, and what data? Sometimes we just collect data for the sake of it, but it should be answering questions. What question do you want to answer across the season? Football itself is very emotional and subjective, but you can back that up with objectivity, as in playing that started their cycle. So the subjective was, oh, they didn't perform today. Okay, let's look at for reasons. Let's try and explain things. Yeah, it's It's difficult at times because you really do have to observe things across a period of time, but it's also very important to know your players and then how they respond. And that's something I think we've moved away from, the dose response. How someone responding, two people will respond completely differently. So if he's a nutrition, I had to tell me they weren't fit, and I was looking across their numbers, and I was like, I think this is a nutritional issue. And then nutritionists did their tests, and they made blood sampling off the top of my head, and they said their electrolytes are incredibly low, and we're playing in very hot climates. Go back to the player and say, look, let's try this for 4 to 6 weeks. And I never heard them not fit again. But that was just a little tweak of trying to understand that individual, trying to understand the problem and how it's going to come together.
Yeah, I've seen those types of things when somebody's got low vitamin B12, or they're maybe a little bit anemic. So there is those things that if the player is feeling tired yet doing all the right things and recovering well, is there something systemically that potentially is going on? I think it's always an interesting conversation. And that, I agree with you, that there's a problem-solving nature to the backroom staff element, isn't there? And in order to try and gain optimal performance. Now, with that said, do you think the football industry is doing enough to individualise physical prep for women?
I think that comes down to resources. One club I spoke to recently have 4 practitioners and a head of department, and each of those 4 practitioners have about 8 players that they work with across the season. That's their 8 players. I think that's a fantastic way to work, but that comes down to funding and resources. So I think when we look at the individualization side of things, we could be better. I've worked lone wolf is the way where you're working with 30 odd people daily. You can't get round to all of those people and plan and program, monitor what they're doing on the pitch. Yeah, I think that will come in time. And there are clubs in the WSL that are doing that, but it will come across a period of time. If you truly want to get down to individualization, I would just laugh and say, if I was a teacher and I've got 30 kids and it was just me, that wouldn't happen. I'd have teaching assistants and everything I've got, which makes you think on your feet. But yeah, individualization has come up a lot within the women's game, in my experiences. And sometimes it comes down to resources. Now, I've worked with physios who are incredibly interested in sports science. I don't know what physios do as such. I'm not trained in that area, and they're not trained in sports science, but you can collaborate. And I think that's a good collaborate. It should be siloed, and we should collaborate. And I think a lot more CPD can be done on female athletes. But what we got to remember again is it's the same game. So we still need to have that in our minds. There's no point saying the operation was the patient died. It's not what it's about.
That would definitely not be a successful
World-class player, but there are anything else hanging on. But I think we've got a long way to go. Collaboration. But again, I'm quite confident what I've seen within the women's game, the academies, is more England winning the Euros again. There's going to be more participation. There's going to be a bigger talent pool. There's going to be more demand for quality practitioners as well. So, yeah, I think we've got to move away from the attitude, just put them in the women's team first. And that's common. I spoke to a player I worked with who was captain of Spain, or had been, and they were telling me that Mauricio Pochettino was their first ever coach at Espanyol, because in Spain, when they're doing their coaching badges, they will work with the women's team, and I thought that was actually quite good, but it shouldn't just be, well, they're the women's. On the other side of that, it shouldn't just be go and do your sports science, go and do your SSE, come back to us. We need to be integrated and collaborated for the best possible outcomes.
Yeah, I think some of the greatest backroom staffs that I've ever worked with, everybody's been very respectful of everybody's role, but everybody's worked together for the benefit of the player and also the benefit of just the team result. Because at the end of the day, when you're in elite, it's about the result. We still say that you should centre the player with that, but it doesn't always happen, does it? Let's talk recovery, because that's a big kind of hot topic. And if there's one thing I see all over Instagram and all over TikTok is recovery strategies that I'm like, yeah, that's not been studied. You can buy that on TikTok shop. Yeah, been studied. Right. So let's talk recovery strategies that you found particularly effective.
Yeah, and look, recovery is a multi-billion industry. A lot of it is not validated. I see some really difficult things as a scientist. What is going on here? And I've tried a lot of the tech myself, and I was like, that cannot be accurate. And if I talk about, let's just talk about sleep, and I'll generalize. I had a great night's sleep, feel amazing, but my app is saying I'm in the red, therefore I should feel poorly. What's more important, so it can be highly erroneous in that way. That can then lead to people saying, I don't think I should train because of this. I think you've got to respect and understand the limitations. Now, with regard to recovery, what you're recovering from is I've seen 37-year-old lead to 500-600 appearances recover incredibly quickly. They never did a recovery thing in their life. The other side of it, people depend on it. I must do this. That's fine. But perception of recovery is not physiological recovery. So the way I've worked on it with the help of some very good friends of mine is I say to the players, you've got to determine what is metabolic fatigue. So all the things are flying around your body, and what is mechanical. So mechanical is going to be sore. If it's metabolic, you're likely to feel sluggish. That then determines what strategy or what intervention you're going to use. And that's maybe a slight oversimplification, but you'll generally get players that are sore first and quite sluggish, or the other way around, depends. But yeah, and then they'll go and pick their own. But if you say that you're sluggish and you go and use, right, I'm going to go and use the bike and everything else, clear out the waste, then I'm going to ice bath. Well, isn't that probably 10, 15 minutes that you could be doing something else that's beneficial for that? Now, you've got sore muscles. I think maybe let's go in the ice bath, or even cold water therapy or cold water immersion is conflicting. So, for example, we know that it has the potential to increase, we use slightly general aerobic outputs, but we also know it can decrease strength and power, or certainly power. So if you're ice bathing before going in the gym, that's maybe not a bad thing. If you're doing it afterwards, you might lose those adaptations. Now, if you've got a session in the morning, quite high intensity, have your ice bath, go in the gym, away you go. If you do it the other way, where you train, you have your lunch, go in the gym and do your ice bath, then there might be a lot of good work. You're not actually recovering from anything, you're probably blunting something.
Yeah, and there's also that other side of things that some people like cold water immersion for almost that sort of well-being, mental health sometimes. So there's those sorts of things. And yeah, I don't know. I'm at that stage in my career, I've said this so many times, the more I read, the less I actually know. I come back to the player and say, what do you think? And then but then they'll go, you're the expert. And I'm like, really? Because I feel like I read. So yeah, there is that. And I think recovery is always a very interesting one, but I completely agree what you said about wearables, because I've seen players have a really great night's sleep, feel great, wake up, check their watch and go, oh no, I didn't. And they've got anxiety from what the watch has said. Yeah, they feel fine. I'm like, trust yourself.
And I think I've worked with some incredible athletes who have been incredibly successful, and they just do what they need to do. That's their way. And I won't name them because I'd be so fortunate. There's so many of them, but that's what they do. And I think we have to, as practitioners, we have to respect that if it's not doing someone harm. I think that's what we need to differentiate. Everybody will talk about placebo, but what knows where there's a detrimental effect, and that's what you need to detect.
Yeah. And again, I think getting athletes to trust their bodies as well as, and you tell me what has tended to work for you in the past. That's something I find myself asking more and more. What have you done before when this has happened? And often the athlete will give you the answer. That's the way I've kind of looked at it. Now, let's talk about younger girls, because I'm seeing a lot more of young girls getting really intensive training, especially at pre-season. So let's chat about them. Are we getting long-term physical development right for them yet? Or have we still got a long way to go?
Yeah, that's a great question. And people like Naomi Myhill, Stacey Emmons have done incredible work in this area, which is, I have to say, I've learned from them. And so what we know is girls mature than boys. What we do see is that, so they should be starting younger with, let's say, strength and conditioning. I've heard as young as 9, because a 13-year-old boy is a 13-year-old girl, give or take, because obviously we accept there are nuances. So that will then determine what they're doing. So if you've got a 12-year-old boy and a 12-year-old girl doing the same thing, which one is likely to be more detrimental to performance-wise? Now, that concerns me a lot. And the reason that concerns me is I've seen, and like I say, the talent pool is now getting bigger in the women's game. More people are participating. We're seeing more girls. 10 years ago, probably less than that, a young girl would not say, I want to be a professional footballer. They might do, but they might have had to have gone to America or gone through the college system or whatever it was. Now it's a realistic chance. But that doesn't mean that we disregard the training that goes before that. So we always like adolescent males to adolescent females, academy players, but it's different because of growth and maturation. So that needs to be factored in. I've seen players come in on trial, adolescents, females, not so much males, but females definitely. And they have had no support, no S&C support, they'll go into the weight room. They're like a rabbit in headlights because it's all new to them. And then you'll find they may break down while they're on trial physically because they're not used to those demands. And I think we can't just keep pushing people to the top without understanding what they've done before. So I think we've been great across the boys' academies doing this throughout the years. Now is the time, and it is happening with the professional game academies and the auditing of the professional women's academies as well. And it will evolve and it will get better. But I also think in that area, we probably need more specialists in the women game at the younger age group. And the boys, obviously, you have, let's say, free academy, youth development, professional development. And it is taking shape like that, but we probably need more specialists in that area, like the likes of Stacey and Sal, who work in that sphere and who understand the growth and maturation and those. And there is more research coming out on it, and there will be more research. And I think that's a good place to be.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think, again, it comes down to what we were chatting before we came on about the investment that needs to go on into women's football. If you invest in the athlete, you should get better athletes. So coming on to the closing stages of this, if you could give one piece of advice to practitioners working with female players, what would it be?
I think, look, I'm a scientist. I'm not going to deny that. But I think we've avoided a lot of in the women's game saying there's not enough research. And that's true. But in the last 3 years, it's exponentially grown. That doesn't mean it's all quality, but understand your athletes by doing your research, but also don't disregard the qualitative side of it. Understand that person, their experience, what they've done before, their experience of sports science and S&C, and that might have actually been a bad experience for them. So they might say, no, I'm not doing that. Why should I? And we could talk about the self-determination theory or goal theory and those why people are resistant. Well, we've got to understand that it hasn't been the same, and we've already looked at resources. So the experiences are going to be completely different. The organised, and I'm lucky in the academies I've worked with elite players. If you think at grassroots level or someone just with the lesser resources, they're not going to be privy to some of the things that we have. So if you are working with those players, try and understand them and don't be in a rush to apply everything that you see the elite players doing. They're elite for a reason. Be patient, understand the younger players, actually support them on that path.
Yeah, and I think that that's a big point. Investment and support. If we could solve those two problems, I think we'd see a lot kind of more well-rounded athletes coming through. And hopefully with the fact that it is getting bigger and it is growing, hopefully we will see that. Andrew, if there's people that want to kind of connect with you, because you're obviously got a lot of experience with regards to sports science. Obviously, you've done strength and conditioning as well. You're now doing a PhD. Where can they connect or follow you?
Yeah, probably LinkedIn is the best. I'm always open to questions and I will try and get to people as much as I can. Yeah, I pop the odd little bits on LinkedIn myself, and I'm very curious to learn what the practitioners are doing as well. And I think as a collective, we can all make the women's football world better if we all collaborate and we share things and say, okay, because not everyone's right. We can't always be right. You don't know what you don't know. The more we collaborate and like this podcast and open up to the world what's going on within women's football, we'll get it. It will come. It will get to a better place. And who knows, maybe in a few years, we won't be talking about injury rates. The question there is because it's more televised and more people watch it, are they picking up on these injuries? When we actually know it hasn't, over 20 years, there hasn't been, and you spoke about an epidemic, over 20 years, ACL rates have not changed.
That's right, yeah. And again, social media is going to be the big thing I'm going to have to move into at some point, because if you clear up injury, I'm not going to have a job. I'm going to become an influencer.
We're definitely getting older now because sometimes I'm not onto that, because you come across a little bit, I guess, arrogant, but you do look and go, I'm not sure that's right.
There have been many times I have typed something out and went, just delete that. You don't have time to argue about that all night. So that comes with experience. That definitely comes with experience. Listen, it's been wonderful to talk to you today. I really could talk to you for a lot longer because I know you've got so much insight, especially into both the male and female game. For those of you that have been listening, please always follow the evidence. Do have a think about physical preparation, especially for young girls. We will see you soon.
Thank you for listening to Women's Football Hub. The information within this podcast is for informational purposes only. No material on this podcast is intended to be a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please contact your doctor or another healthcare professional if you have any questions about anything raised in this podcast.